Okay. Hello, everyone. Well, today I've got a confession rather than a story, though I suppose admissions are a kind of fiction, even when they are, in theory, completely honest. Anyway, today's tale, I recently discovered that I was drinking too much. Oh, I'm not an alcoholic. I'm not a drunk, whatever that means. But in the evening, sometimes, not always, but sometimes, I do find it difficult not to have a glass of fairly good whiskey, neat or on the rocks, or usually just a single chunk of ice. And sometimes the small glass of whiskey turns into 2 glasses of whiskey, and then 3. And I end up nodding off at 9 o'clock at night and keeping my wife awake when I snore. That's a problem. But I sort of figured out anyway, why I'm doing it. First, it's because I'm bored. A long story on that. Second, because I suffer from mild depression, have for years. And right now I'm not medicated. It has to do with finding a GP who will prescribe Zoloft or whatever it is that's in fashion these days. And third, I just like the taste of good whiskey. But recently, I've discovered that there is a 4th reason. And that reason, specifically, is this guy here. Let me explain. I am now in my 60s. And when you hit this age, you discover that just as there is a second childhood, so too is there a sort of second adolescence. In the first adolescence, you try out different identities. You try to figure out who you are and who you will become. You hope you are James Bond or Wonder Woman. In the end, though, you settle for something much less dramatic, but something much more achievable and, hopefully, sustainable. But in the second adolescence, you consider what identities you will discard. As older dreams are no longer viable, you consider who you will become now that you can no longer be a child prodigy, an enfant terrible, or a wunderkind. You look for alternative views, alternative imaginary personae, something else to be in this new and unexpected version of yourself, when your body and your mind are not yet old, but no longer young. And for me, one of those was, well, him. I'm not quite sure where I encountered him, this guy. Probably on TV or the web. Or maybe even in politics. He does resemble, after all, Dark Brandon, doesn't he? I even did another video about him a while back, albeit in a completely different context. Anyway, let's call him the Silver Fox. He's the cool, middle-aged guy. Going gray at the temples, but vigorous and handsome, attractive, sophisticated, successful in some profession, say real estate or software. Affluent, if not really, really rich, and seated in an expensive leather chair at night after a productive day, and with a glass of whiskey in his hand. I must confess that, consciously or not, when I first saw him, I thought, how cool is that? To be at the peak of one's personal Darien, to be looking back on a lifetime of achievement, knowing, yes, that the rest is downhill, but still so much done, so much to be proud of. That would be a pretty cool way to grow old. And for a couple of weeks, I had that fantasy, just as in my first adolescence I was going to grow up to be Superman, so now in my second I would be him. The problem is, I've found that pleasant though that fantasy may be, like whiskey, it is kind of dangerous, kind of self-destructive. Because you see, I am not him, and pretending I am forces me instead to consider how very much unlike him I really am. I like his accomplishments, his achievements, his self-satisfaction, his dignity. And just as bad, I found myself during that period drinking more, because of course a silver fox does drink. He drinks a lot. Each night, after 5, in the leather chair with a book in his lap, he has the glass with the ice and 2 carefully measured ounces of blended malt, and then maybe another and a third, and never gets inebriated. He is simply mellow, or perhaps melancholy. But I'm another story. So, after a time, I realized that this particular fantasy, this particular identity, with or without the exquisite malt in the glass, was a problem, even destructive. I decided that for my own well-being and the comfort of those around me, I needed to abandon the silver fox, the pretended me. It would be healthier for me. And also more honest. I need to be a me who is more truly me. Well, live and learn. And besides, I undertake now a new adventure. Now I will go in search of my next imaginary identity, which, let us hope, will be a bit more real. Or failing that, at least a little less drunken.